Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to see you. I am so excited. I always say that as people come into an event via Zoom, I always feel that I am winning a little piece of chocolate, I think, as each person comes into the Zoom screen, because it's something that I find very special that we can all come together, particularly during these very difficult times, and we can all connect with one another. So this makes me very happy to see you all. And we have writers and readers coming in from throughout the United States, from Canada. Hello, Susan. And we have a writer coming in from London, and that I'm excited to welcome. And it's just wonderful. I'm looking at all of you here. Tonight's event is hosted by Women Reading Aloud. I'm the director and founder of Women Reading Aloud, and we've been an ongoing organization, a nonprofit 501c3 organization for 17 years, which stuns me even as I say it. It's an organization that began around my dining room table, and we continue to honor every reader and writer and every person who wants to tell a story and to explore her voice and to understand the different notes in a voice and how exciting that can be. So tonight's guest, I'm so honored and I am so pleased to introduce to you Laraine Herring. And let me tell you something about Laraine. Since 2007, I've been reading books by Laraine Herring. That was the year that Writing Begins with the Breath was first published, followed by The Writing Warrior, and then in 2016, On Being Stuck was published. These are three books on the craft of writing. I also have to interject here that although they are on the craft of writing, I'll be asking Laraine, I do feel that they are books that can very much relate to how we live. Laraine has written novels and poetry, and most recently in 2020, we saw the publication of The Grief Forest with the subtitle, listen carefully, the subtitle is A Book About What We Don't Talk About. Laraine is a tenured professor of creative writing and psychology and currently teaches full-time at Yavapai College in Prescott, Arizona. She is a member of the Authors Guild and the American Association of University Professors. She holds an MFA in creative writing and an MA in counseling psychology. Her short stories, poems, and essays have appeared in national and local publications, including the New York Times, which I just read today, and I absolutely loved that essay. It was wonderful. And you can tell us more about that. Her fiction has won the Barbara Deming Award for Women, and her nonfiction work has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize. I do have to tell you that her upcoming memoir is due out in October, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And it's called A Constellation of Ghosts, a speculative memoir with ravens. So a warm welcome to Laraine Herring, coming in from Prescott, Arizona. So thank you, Laraine, for coming in today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we're going to, I want to tell you that when we spoke on the phone this week, Laraine and I, of course, we had never met, but I have been a huge fan for many, many years. And one of the, a few words came up in our conversation, and the words that I was listening to as Laraine was speaking were the evolution of an artist. And I thought about that, and I thought how intrigued I am by these two words that are coming up. First, the word evolution, and then the word artist. So Laraine, as you look back, can you tell us where would you say your creative life started, or when?
When I was 6, I wrote a memoir.
Well, you must have had a lot to say.
Yeah, I had a lot to say, and it was $1.50, and it was called My Name is Laraine, and I bound it all up, and I tried to sell it around the neighborhood. I like hand wrote all these copies out. I mean, it wasn't like hundreds of pages long. It was it was, but I still have it, and so it's kind of cool to look back on, what it was, what it was kind of like, and I kind of did that up until about third starting and going into third grade, which was the year that my dad had his heart attack. And I found that to be interesting as well, that was kind of when I stopped that piece, kind of piece of myself. But very early on, like all I ever wanted to do was make things,
Was make things.
yeah, I wanted to
And
make
so
things.
do you feel that your home environment, that you were nurtured to
Yeah,
be creative?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
The
I think
books,
they would have been happier if I were a surgeon
all
in,
right.
in some ways, but no, very much we were encouraged to do what we were kind of called to do.
And what about books? I mean, how big a role did books play in your creative life as a child?
So much, so much. We went to the library all the time. My mom grew up in Brooklyn, and spent all of her time in the library or either the museums. And so I grew up in Charlotte, in North Carolina. And so we were going to children's theater early. We
Mm.
were always, at the library, always being, either reading or being read to, and we just these stacks of, we had so many books. I mean, they were always a part of
I grew up around the corner from the library too, a little branch library. And I was just speaking about this last night to my husband. And I was telling him that my most joyous time was always on a Friday. And if it rained, it was even better. And I would walk around the corner to the library. I was allowed 4 books. And then I would come home in the rain. And I knew that all weekend I had those books to read. So was that a similar kind of joy for you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know if they had this in your school, but they would have these, book reading contests,
Yes.
who could read the most books, and it was like amateur hour. I mean, like who only reads, it was, I felt very competitive about making sure I read the most books of
Yes.
anyone, over the summer and stuff.
Let's
So
go to some of your writing books and
yeah.
the writing warrior. Uh, and I think that was your second book. I'm sort of going out of order here, but the writing warrior says, you say something here. You say, when you take the time to be still and listen, the first things you'll hear are the things you swallowed into your belly. And then you go on to say, stay. And then you continue with, stay longer than you ever thought you could. Sit and stay. Can you talk about this? Can you talk about what it takes to stay and to listen, as opposed to the monkey chatter that I think all of us probably have difficulty with and find it a challenge?
Oh yeah. I mean, and the monkey brain is part of all of us, I mean, that distraction, that, let's step out of where we are and do something else when things get uncomfortable. It's so interesting to go back that far, because I think that book was 2010.
Mhm.
And after having lived through 2020 and how we all were,
Yes,
most of us have been forced to be more still and to be more contained and isolated. It kind of, those words mean something really different to me now than they did then, when I felt like I could almost curate the time for that. Like, this is my writing time
yes,
between 5:30 and 7 in the morning before work or whenever it is, and set a boundary around that, and
yes,
then go on and have like a whole day. But I pretty much haven't left my house since March.
yes,
Like, and I know many people have been in the same, kind of
yeah.
situation. Um and that's a whole other level, and I'm not about to say I've mastered it, of being comfortable with your own self
Mhm.
and the things that come up, and watching your tendencies and patterns. And there's just now so much, for me anyway, there's so much opportunity
Mhm.
to pay attention to the ways that you get in your own way, the ways that I get in my own way, the ways that I do want to turn away from things. I was talking to my husband yesterday. I feel a tremendous amount of relief after the inauguration, that then started to open up to spaces, things that I have not been I think really, really looking at as
Mhm.
closely as I could, as I was focused on those 4 years, on chaos management, and on the and then managing cancer. So those years were intertwined for me.
Mhm.
Um, and now I'm feeling the stillness without having to have so much energy in this other sphere. I'm feeling things bubbling up that I thought, I mean, I wrote a whole memoir about it, and I thought I had looked at things and thought I had, um, but it's like, I mean, it's a trauma response. And once you start to feel some safety, then some things can come up that before, when you were
Yeah.
in crisis management mode, they can't come up. Um, and so I'm kind of relearning how to sit with that and look at that. And it's made more complicated by the fact that my whole work life is online,
Yes. Mhm.
and the spaces where I would go to write, I can't go to. And so like everything is so, that book just feels so like far away. Like, will we ever be able to go, you know, go to a
But
coffee
isn't
shop
isn't
again
that
and
what
do that?
we're
It's
isn't that what we're talking about? I mean, if you think about this past year, uh, it is some kind of evolution,
yeah,
perhaps, perhaps. And so you're talking about that book being so long ago and
yeah.
how you've perhaps changed, in your philosophies. But of course, if we're fortunate, perhaps, if we're lucky to stumble upon transition or change, uh, isn't that a good thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that what you read, I feel resonant with it.
Yes.
It's just the space in which I wrote it versus versus looking at it through the lens of today. It feels very,
Mhm.
very different. 2020 came to play.
Yes. When you wrote the first book, and I'll hold
Mhm.
this up, and this is the first book that I read actually here, and writing begins with the breath. And you can see I have all my Post-its in here, and I have to thank Jackie Bonanno here because she's on the call here in the meeting. And Jackie was in a workshop of mine, and she said, "Oh, you have to read this book by Laraine Herring."
Aw.
And and yet you also you speak quite a lot about breath, not only in this book, but even in the Warrior book. You speak
Mhm,
about yoga,
mhm.
and you speak about meditation. And so I wonder if you could speak a little bit about why you even wrote this book on this craft of on writing and on this book on the writing craft, and what breath has to do with it.
I think the title really does kind of encapsulate that. And ironically, it's a title that I did not like and I fought back on. Um, I thought it was too direct. I wanted some like poetic, fancy, kind of title. And they're like, yeah, but you're really saying this. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I'm really saying that.
Mhm.
And so the I had just I had I'm not an athlete. We should start with that. And because I am not an athlete, most of my childhood and high school times was spent reading and not having anything to do with my body. My body was like this thing that you had to be in to use your brain.
Mm, mhm.
And so, I was the last one picked for every team, all that kind of stuff. And then in my late 20s, I was really starting to have some issues. I was starting to have some high blood pressure issues, some cholesterol issues. And because my dad died so young, we were concerned about that. And just the thought of going to a gym just sent me into flashbacks from middle school. And, like I didn't want to do anything like that. So I went to a yoga class, and that was sort of the beginning of, unfortunately, it was with a teacher um, who had a lot of body positivity and was, it was a,
Mhm.
a compassionate class. And I learned how to be inside of my own body for the first time in my late 20s, early 30s, and feeling that and feeling like my body was something that wasn't separate from me and that wasn't um, an annoyance or a nuisance or not, not. Um, yoga really taught me about love.
Oh,
And
my
then,
goodness. I mean,
you
that's
know,
a big statement to make, that yoga
yeah,
taught you about, I mean, I'm gonna borrow that. I like that.
okay.
I'm gonna borrow
I'm
that.
sure I didn't make it up. I think,
Yeah,
I think,
yeah, you know,
it,
so
and so the
I
classes I was in, we did a lot of pranayama practice, and I
yes,
noticed, which is the breath, the breath work,
yes,
and
yeah.
I noticed that my writing was opening up in new ways. And so I was curious, like, is there anything to do with movement and and a flow state? And of course, I'm not the first one to do that either. Brenda Euland, 100 years ago, Why We
Yeah.
Write talks about walking, and I mean, I certainly didn't kind of come up with that, um, but I thought, and it was terrifying to do because again, I never felt like I could teach body things. And when this book came out, Kripalu called, which was weird. And I didn't even know who they were because I'm a West Coast girl. And I'm like, who are these people? And, and they invited me to teach a workshop. And so all of a sudden I was leading yoga and movement with people. Like I went from, that was my first time doing it in a venue like that in front of
Now,
other people.
were
Uh,
you incorporating, in any way your writing
of
within
course. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I wasn't like leading a yoga class, but it was a workshop based on the book. And so we did body breaks, we did breathing exercises, we did some movement pieces, and to try to lead that was was a really great experience. And to be able to lead it and not be able to make the shapes, even still, even after,
Yes, yeah.
and I've been practicing yoga now 20 some years, and I went through yoga teacher training and
Mhm.
did all of that, but I still like can't do all the things.
Mm.
And to be able to model that was really useful, both in my growth as a teacher, but
Mhm.
also in my acceptance of the the messiness of my own writing process.
I think it's really, I always feel that the people who are meant to show up for an event, a workshop, a lecture like this, any kind of seminar, are the ones that absolutely are supposed to be there. And tonight we have on the screen Joanne Edelman in the meeting, and I will tell you that she is my sister, and
Oh.
she lives in New York City, and she teaches at the Stella Adler School, and she teaches movement for actors and includes so much poetry as well as children's
Mm,
books.
mhm.
So the two of you should have a conversation someday.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, be very, very, and runs an amazing poetry program through the Stella Adler School that is
Oh,
also connected with NYU, by the way.
oh, cool.
Yes. So you see, we're all here, and I do think that we are all connected, and the things that bring us together are our mutual passions. There's a
Mhm.
word that you do use though in this book, and that struck me, and it is detachment.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really big word. And do you remember writing about that? I know you actually wrote about it 13 years ago. But that's because I love to see the evolution of the artist. That's why I'm bringing it up. And you say something like this, and maybe your idea has completely changed. And that I would love to hear that if your idea has changed about detachment. And you say, you about speaking away from unhealthy attachments. And has the concept actually changed now in 2021? And if you think about it, if we go back to this whole year that we've spent, do you think that it has given us opportunity to break away from detachments? And why did you bring up the word detachment in writing about this book, having to do with writing?
Did you mean in your question, and did we have a chance to look at attachments or look at detachments?
Detachments, detachments, and how to pull away from unhealthy attachments.
Hmm. Oh, yes, I think there's been fertile ground for that. And I don't think that I've changed very much on this because I think attachment is one of my life issues that I kind of keep circling around and learning more about it and learning more about my own patterns around attachment. Um, but in terms of writing and in terms of where that was coming from in that book, I had just started working in higher ed full time. And if anyone out there is in higher ed or ed in any way, they're obsessed with learning outcomes and measurable, um, measurable learning.
Mhm.
And it frustrated me so much because we were supposed to go into a class with a preconceived idea of what the student was supposed to take away from it. And
Mm.
that just felt so foreign to me as a teacher. And it felt really presumptuous and paternalistic as well. It felt like, I mean, who am I to say what you need to take away from a class or what you should take away from a class? So this does put me at odds at my institution, and I fill out the forms because I have to, and then I still kind of do what I want. Um, but I think that people learn and get conditioned to feel like if they didn't complete X at a particular time, they
Mm.
failed.
Mhm.
And then that sets up the negative self-talk. It sets up the tension, the anxiety around the work. And so what if, and again, this goes back to love, what if we could approach every writing session with gratitude and with just the,
Mm.
love for it being there, for what happened, rather than, oh, I thought I was going to complete this part of my novel, or I thought I was going to understand this character better. And so then when that doesn't happen, you view it through the lens of what didn't happen instead of through the lens of what did happen. And I
Mm.
think that sets people up for unnecessary suffering,
Mm.
in their writing and in their life. Um, and it's certainly, so it's about expectations. And one of the, I think it's in Breath where I talk about releasing attachment to outcomes, which is the same
Mhm.
basic,
And
kind of
then,
concept.
in your book on being stuck,
Yeah.
and maybe you might read something for us from that if you like, or any other
Mhm.
of these craft books that you'd like. I know we'd love to hear something. But on being stuck, you say the stories need their writers and writers need their stories. Together we can love the world alive. I really want to read that again because it's really profound. The stories need their writers, and writers need their stories. Together, we can love the world alive. Does everyone have stories?
Yes.
And does everyone recognize the stories that they have?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think I recognize all the stories I have.
Hmm.
Like I think that's part of being human and continuing to grow, and seeing the stories that you make up about yourself, you make up about your relationship to others and to the world, um, and then the creative stories that you might have if you were writing fiction, or the art piece. But humans are story people. I mean, that's how we explain things. It's how we talk about, the world from early folklore and mythology. And, it was a way of explaining things we didn't understand, or a way of, kind of learning about things. And, um, you know, when you think about how you make meaning out of your own experiences, you make meaning through the story, and where it gets, kind of fun is that your story and my story about the same situation are not going to be the same.
Hmm.
And so, um, but I love that. I do love what you just read, because I really still very much resonate with that.
Hmm.
And going back to the love, and I feel like, On Being Stuck was, that final component in, um, really meeting your writing as an equal, and meeting, with that place, or from that place of receptivity, rather than the more ego-centered, or even arrogant space of, I'm going to do this today, or I'm going to,
Hmm.
you know and so I really like that idea of co-creating. So the writer is here, and your, whatever you think of as your source for your writing, kind of over here,
Yeah.
and they have to come together, and you have to really respect and listen, to each other, because you need each other,
Hmm.
and if you can treat your writing like you would treat a beloved, human, there's just going to be, much better communication and much easier flow. And if you berate yourself all the time, or your work, and because I've taught for so long, and I've seen and heard the way students talk about their own work, it's, it's really, kind of it's soul crushing the way that they would never speak to anybody else the way they talk about
Mm.
their early work or their even later work. And they wouldn't talk about another student's work that way either. It's like it's all kind of reserved, all of this judgment for what they just made. And what they just made was this beautiful beginning, but they were likely viewing it through what it should have been or what it would look like after it's been revised 100 times or after it's, and so they can't see the beauty of it. And I
I'm
really
glad
want
I'm
people
I'm glad that you like that quote because that
I
is your
do.
quote.
It is, yeah, I do know that's my
That-
book, yeah.
and that, by the way, your quote is on page 79, just in case you're looking for it. And it's in the book on being stuck. And is it from that book that you wanted to read something to us? And never.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the piece that I pulled out actually connects to your earlier question, because I was just thinking, I've just been thinking so much about the global trauma of COVID and 2020 and just, all of that is certainly not unique to the United States. And so the piece I found was about staying where you're uncomfortable. So I'm writing about this again 10 years later from the first time, because it's still, how you teach what you need to keep learning,
Oh,
all the over and over and over again. And so this is in chapter 27 in that book. We've been taught to move away from what is uncomfortable. This is absolutely logical and serves us well when the discomfort is physical pain. When you put your hand on the stovetop and it's hot, the pain is your signal, your teacher telling you to move your hand right now. People who suffer from rare genetic disorders that prevent them from feeling pain have to be extremely careful because they don't know that they've touched a burner, broken a leg, or gnawed their tongue to shreds as they were grinding their teeth. Pain lets us know we need to do something different. But the pain itself is rarely the problem. The pain is signaling the problem. Pain tells us to pay attention. When we're writing, we are not, we hope, in physical pain, but our work can ignite emotional pain and discomfort and those internal signals to pay attention.
mm.
And those kind of emotional attention grabbers can trigger the same response as physical pain. Get away now, move away from whatever is causing this sensation. And then I list a bunch of things that we all do. Check email, check Facebook, go shopping when we could do that, go to the gym when I could do that, clean the house, turn off the computer, eat, drink, calls, text, all these different ways of deflecting,
So I
from
think
that space.
when you, and thank you for reading that. What I mean then is that even though these are craft books on writing, they are so relevant to how we live our lives. And that's what I kept finding. You're
Mm.
talking about authentic voice and you're moving away from unhealthy attachments and detaching. All of these things are philosophies about how we might live our lives. I really want to go to now what was published in 2020
Mm.
and what actually brought us together when I told you how much I love this book. And this is The Grief Forest, and a book about what we don't talk about. I would love you to just begin and tell us how you came up with this story. Tell us what it is. I will say originally I thought it was going to be a children's story because of the cover, the illustrations. And I know you say, I believe in your author's notes that you were not a professional illustrator, but you did illustrate
I
this
did
book.
illustrated. Mm-hmm.
And so can you talk about what first made you think of this book, the premise of this book, why you wanted to write it, and why you took that leap to illustrate your own book?
Lockdown and COVID and um, really feeling the collective grief of the pandemic response and the numbers of dead, and then particularly for me, because my focus in practice was in grief
Mhm.
counseling and grief therapy, the inability to have rituals together around the death of someone,
Mm.
the inability to be at the bedsides of people who were dying because of COVID, um, and I was just really having trouble putting sentences together, which was my default. Like I want to just write things when I don't know what's going on. And so I started doodling, and then I just started putting them up on Facebook, and people wrote back about them. Like I would do this doodle and I would have just this little sentence about grief. And I think if nobody had responded to them, I wouldn't have done anything else. But I was really surprised by the response on Facebook, because I don't tend to get a ton of responses. I'm not great at social media. I try to be, you know, my cat pictures get a lot of responses. And then it was, and then, um, and then I feel like I, in many ways, almost co-created the book with my friends on Facebook, because they would be like, oh, this looks like it's doing this, or what if, you know, talk about this. And so what kind of gelled for me was that I wanted to distill 20 years of studying grief, practicing grief therapy, working with children. I worked mostly with children in grief, but I also did work in hospice down in Phoenix, and that was not mostly children. And I wanted to create something that would be a companion for people, that wasn't, there's really a lot of good books about grief and about, how to, kind of how to work with it. But they're intellectual, and they're kind of giving you, they're giving you tools, they're giving you advice, and kind of all that sort of stuff. But I don't find them to be very useful for a griever in the middle of grieving. You need to be a little bit out of that, that almost that kind of liminal space to be able to start to I think about things in a different way. You're still in the middle of your suffering. And I wanted Bunny to be a friend.
Well, let's tell
And
us, tell us first now, who is Bunny?
Bunny's the star of the book.
Bunny is the star. Yeah, so your characters are all these different animals.
They're all these different animals. And Bunny's father died, and Bunny didn't do very well with that. Which of course was my own story. And so she goes into the grief forest, and there's lots of terminology around grief, but the word bereavement is a noun, and it's like a space, and it's when someone is in a state of bereavement, they're in this place. And I thought, what would be a cool metaphor for what that place is that I could maybe dramatize. And so then I got the idea of a forest, and then she just sort of started meeting animals.
Yes.
And I would literally be, our gym is open at 25%, and I would be, running in place, because that's all we could do, because we have no group classes. And I would get these images and would know what to go and draw, and what the particular grief element was. And so I was kind of thinking along the lines of, it's not a haiku, but I wanted to kind of distill, decades of working with grief into almost poetry. And
yes.
So that, I think for sure kids could get some things out of the book, but it's for adults.
Oh,
I think,
definitely, I would agree. I think it's definitely for adults, because you have pearls of wisdom on every page. And I mean, on every page I would stop, and out of the mouth of a horse, or an octopus, or the jellyfish, the bullfrog, what they all were saying. And I would just stop there and I would think about it. And as I have read this book 3 times, and I can tell everyone that is a book that you can sit down and read in one setting. And but the pearls of wisdom I want to know about, as far as how did you discover them now at this point in your life? How do you discover pearls of wisdom, and how do you, more importantly, collect them? And did you, over a period of time, write these little fragments down on pieces of paper and run around your house and look for them when you were putting this book together? Or did you stay and sit quietly and think, what do I know?
No, I have never created anything in the way that I created this. So it was brand new, and not just because of the illustration piece. I've always felt like my work is in harmony with some other thing. Like, I don't feel like anything is all me. But this work, I feel very much was, I hesitate to use the word channeled, but it felt very channeled, because I was obsessed I hadn't drawn anything since like 4th grade. And I just sat and I did this all on the iPad and just was manically drawing through the summer. I mean, it was getting close to obsession. I'd be like, I got what the horse is supposed to say. And I'd go and I'd like have to, figure out, what horse was and how to draw a horse and how to, kind of how to use the programs and all of that. And it, in terms of the things I had to say, I feel like I lived them. I mean, not that Bunny's journey is exactly like mine, but from spending so much time with grievers and then also teaching writing for so long, one of the reasons teaching writing is so hard is because you become the keeper of so many people's traumas.
Mm.
And so you hear their stories. And so they're there. I mean, decades of them. And hearing and seeing the way I feel like one of my passions is I really want to change the conversation around grief. I want there to be a conversation around grief, and I can see it shifting. And I think that in many ways, COVID has opened up that door. People are they're realizing that grief is not the enemy, that grief is an experience.
Mhm.
And, denying that experience doesn't serve us anymore, and grief has been my most powerful teacher. That's been my particular emotion
Mhm.
that I've spent the most time trying to understand. And I thought that, or I hoped that by making it illustrated, by the illustrations not being so perfect that they were intimidating, because they're
Mhm.
certainly not that it might soften adults so that they could
Mhm.
feel. I wanted adults to feel, not think. And I thought if the medium um, was a bunny who was kind of wandering around talking to animals, they would pick it up with a lighter heart and
Mhm.
then be surprised.
So I think we're going back again to what you've been speaking about as far as love.
Yeah.
And some of I'm going to quote some of the animals because
Okay.
they're so good. Uh, the octopus, and these are just one of the things, the octopus says, grief requires us to change our skins. I mean, we could talk about that forever, I think. Horse, sometimes you can't see the light you carry until you are in the dark. And then bullfrog says, grief teaches you a new way to breathe. So again, when I'm thinking about the evolution of an artist and I'm hearing you, uh, you are using words like breath and breathe
Mhm.
several times, and you are, using words like love. And if you spoke about listening to stories, and when you are listening to so many stories that are deeply touching and coming deep from the heart, what do you think you learned from your students? You've been in academia and a professor for how many years?
Since 1998. So that's math. So I'm not a professor of math. So that's
So I think,
a long time.
let me think. Okay.
23 years, almost
Yes.
23 years.
Okay. And so uh, sometimes I think if I'm listening to when I'm listening to so many stories, that I sprinkle them along the way in a garden so that they bloom,
Yeah.
so that I have room to listen to
Right.
other stories.
Right. Right.
Uh, and but going, staying on the same line as far as you speak about the grievers in your author's note, you say the grievers become the guides in the book.
Mhm.
So what do you want the guides to tell the reader? What do you want the reader to come away with?
What I want most is that the reader feel witnessed in their own grief. I feel like there's no platitude. Nobody in the book has a platitude. Nobody is all, just keep your chin up, or, nobody is
No,
nobody is
snap
doing
out
that.
of it. Yeah.
Everybody is talking real. about it, and treating Bunny, who is a young Bunny, so a younger character in the book, treating her like a human being. And I feel like children, and again, because that was my focus, and it was where I first met grief personally, that children are often really ignored in the grieving process. They're either written off as resilient, or they don't get the straight talk that would be age appropriate, and so then they make up stories about what has happened. um, I worked for a time at a camp for grievers, and we had a medical doctor who would come on one of the nights, so the kids could ask questions about what happened, about what cancer was, what leukemia was, what all the different things that might have taken their father or their mother or their sibling or their friend, um, because they were super confused, and they didn't know, and they made things up, because that's what you do when you don't have information. You make it up to try to make sense out of things. And like we had one child whose father had died in a workplace accident, so it was a sudden loss. And he brought all of the city maps to camp, and so we would ask him, tell us about these maps, what's up with the maps. And we finally learned that this kid was 8 years old. We finally learned that he wanted help mapping out a bus route to a job, because he had been told that he was now the man of the family.
Ah,
And he knew that the man of the family had a job.
mm,
So it makes perfect sense within child logic.
mm.
And nobody was trying to cause this kid to suffer like this,
Mm, of
and
course.
it's just about, we don't have a dialogue, we don't know how to talk.
Mhm.
And we want to protect people from pain, which is completely understandable, but it doesn't change the fact that there's pain. And so I really wanted Bunny to be respected as a legit griever with legit, emotions. And the book follows this super classic, mythology. They enter into this special world where the creatures that she meets first are in these various stages of different types of complicated grieving.
Mhm.
And then she goes literally under the water, into the water, and that's where she meets jellyfish and octopus and all of those animal creatures.
All those
Um,
great
and,
creatures.
and
Yes.
then and then when she emerges on the other side, she's in the dark forest. I mean, it's classic, story structure from fairy tales.
Mhm.
And when she's emerged on the other side, then the animals that she meet have gone through the journey, and those are the ones that become the guides.
Yeah.
So the people who have had direct experience are the ones who are sharing that direct experience, not
Mhm.
um, not people
You
who just learned about it in books.
you brought up the word cancer before. Did cancer create any pivot in your life?
Cancer was nothing.
Mhm.
Yeah, cancer was everything. Cancer, I was diagnosed in 2016, in early February, with colon cancer.
Mhm.
And and then the diagnosis and the surgery happened in under 2 weeks. Um, and prior to that, I had really never, the worst thing I'd ever had happen was the flu. I had been really healthy. I had not been involved with doctors. I had not been involved in hospitals, outside of what I did when I would visit, clients or people in hospice. And um, so yeah, um, which is cancer is kind of why I feel like when we talked on the phone, like the person that wrote those writing books hadn't been through cancer yet,
Wow.
and the person who wrote the grief forest has been through cancer, and the person or I should say been through living with, I don't, cancer. And um, it just not only made me really recognize the importance of every single choice every day, it brought me even deeper into, how do I love my body? How do I trust the body? Like, how could there have been something growing in my body for a couple years? They figured it was a couple years before there were symptoms, which was when I
Mhm.
noticed. how could that have happened and I didn't know? And so it goes back to that love again. Like,
Yes. Yeah. I was
how
going
can
to
I
say
love
you're
myself more?
being
Like,
loved. And yeah.
how can I love, not love cancer, but how can I love what it is continuing to open up for me?
Mhm.
And I really consciously refuse to use the word fight, um, which is, we say that a lot about, about diseases and things. And because I really felt like if I was engaged in an antagonistic relationship with my body, that I was going to lose.
Mhm.
And so I needed to change the language for myself. Um, I didn't feel comfortable with the things that people were saying to me, around, kicking cancer's ass or whatever, or this and that. And I'm like, okay, I appreciate it. I know what you're saying. And I want it to not be here and I want to be alive. And at the same time, it came out of me. And so I need to figure out a way to have compassion for it.
Mhm.
Um, and that was the really big cancer challenge for me to do that and to find treatments that would support that approach.
Mhm.
And um,
So you're speaking, we're talking about evolution. We're talking
yeah,
about the experiences in our lives and how we write, or what it is that even appeals to us as readers when we're 10 years ago or 20 years ago, or of course, when we were growing up. Or if we go back to the 10 years ago and we go into present time, what are we reading now that maybe we would not have read 10 years ago?
right,
Or how do we write now that maybe
right.
we would not have written 10 years ago? Or what are our philosophies or our inner thoughts that are coming from the deepest places of the crevices of our heart? And now we're going back to love again, aren't we?
Totally are. And I
Mhm.
feel like I made a conscious effort to say thank you to everyone, from the person who wheeled me to this scan, to the person at the pharmacy, to the person, like every single person. And that was helpful for me to be able to recognize that all of these people were in some way, even if they weren't the oncologist, were helping me, and to kind of, that kept me out of myself a little bit,
Yeah.
because you can get really terrified. I mean, I was terrified. I'm not going to lie. I was terrified.
Yes. Yes.
And I still have moments when I remain terrified, before scans, or when you think, when anniversaries roll around, like an anniversary is coming up
Mhm.
soon. And, it's just another layer of,
Yes.
of, I you know, I didn't choose to have cancer, but I can choose what I do with having had cancer
Mhm.
and having lived through cancer. And I want to, and it's an active choice. It's not a passive choice, to keep opening up
Mhm.
to it. And just like my dad being sick when I was young and him dying when I was young, how that really shaped me fundamentally. I think it
Mhm.
opened up some empathy that I probably wouldn't have had at 17,
Mhm.
for people. The same with, the same with cancer. It's another level
Yeah.
um, of softening. I didn't want it to make me hard. I wanted it to make me softer.
Do you have a graphic you could show us
I
uh,
do.
from the Grief Forest and tell us who the character is? Is it the whale?
I was going to show the whale, but now I'm not.
Okay.
let's see, um, because we changed our topic a little bit.
As you're looking for that, there's a wonderful quote. I think Bunny may say it in the book. Grief is a stress response. Rest is best.
That's
And
Bear.
oh, that's Bear. Oh, okay. Excuse
Yeah.
me. That's Bear.
Yeah.
Well, you would
Yeah.
know. Oh, I love this. Tell us about this.
Yeah. So you can see it. That's really great.
Yes, yes, this is great.
so
Yes, this is great.
um so these are the alligators. And so the alligator is coming out of, he's seeing his reflection in the swamp. This is also really mythical. Um, and Bunny, you can see on the page, she's kind of all tangled up in um, her fear and her grief. In the book, the balloons represent griefs. So every animal has griefs of their own. And so Bunny's grief is this little red balloon, and then the alligator has his blue and orange balloons. So Bunny noticed two alligators. One stared into the swamp and another one reflected underneath him. One grief can release older griefs, said the alligator on the swamp's edge. When you meet an older one, it's best to say hello. Bunny did not want to say hello to anything from the dark, so she ran to her safe hiding place. Grief is cumulative, said Alligator's reflection. His tail splashed the swamp and the griefs rippled orange and blue. It builds up inside if you don't express it when you feel it. He opened his mouth wide. You might think you've resolved something, but old sorrows can still surprise you in the dark.
Mm.
And I think that was what happened for me with cancer. And that was what the memoir that's coming out in October is about. It's about intergenerational trauma and looking at what we carry within us forward from from not only our own direct experiences, but from generation to generation. It's never just the one grief. It does trigger other things. Grief does open up to other things that you've experienced, and so the text at the top, it's not in the book itself, but the text at the top is just examples of what this illustration might give someone a chance to talk about. I'm working on a guide for groups and individual grievers to be able to kind of go through the book with the journal and art activities to kind of really dive into it. But this could be unresolved grief, shadow work, retriggering, all those kind of things.
Is there another? I see you have 3 up here. I mean, is there another
Yeah,
graphic you could share with us?
sure.
Because I love seeing the way they interact, the graphic along with the text.
This is the robin, and Robin came in before the alligator. She meets the robin earlier. Robin sat staring at her bright blue egg. It was so pretty and perfect. Death brushed its hand over the egg, and Robin shivered. Bunny started to say something, but Robin's grief blew towards her, and she backed away. My egg didn't hatch, said Robin, even though I did everything right. Bunny loved watching the new birds in the spring. Why would Death want a baby bird? Did you take her egg? Asked Bunny. She was so angry. Death was too greedy. It couldn't just go around taking anything it wanted. I don't take, said Death, but I know it looks like that to you. What do you do then? Asked Bunny. Death turned away. What I must. And so for this one, I was thinking about how, sometimes when people, do move to hospice care, they can feel like they failed in addressing their illness. Some doctors are really resistant to palliative care when that time arises, and you can do all the right things and still die. You can take care of, you can do everything. But there's also, types of losses that we don't talk about often. Miscarriage is one that doesn't have a very large place in our country. Stillbirths, things like loss of dreams. You kind of planned on one kind of career path or one kind of thing, and it didn't work out. Grief isn't just about death. Grief is about a change.
Mm-hmm.
It's a change in a familiar pattern of behavior, a change, and so even things that are joyful, like getting married or partnering or graduating from school, that are supposed to be all happy, you're still leaving an old way of living, and that's a grief moment, that's a grief experience, and we'll gloss over that because we're supposed to be happy, but we're still leaving behind the kids we spent 12 years of our lives with as we move on from college, from high school. And so I wanted each of these illustrations to have a variety of applications, and still be hopefully specific enough to have a solid story thread.
I am going to open this up in a moment for excuse me, for questions from the group. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you is really what feeds you? I mean, I think we can get rid of this now. I mean, we
Yeah,
can,
for sure.
yeah, if that's okay. So we can just
Yep.
bring you in and bring in the group. Thank you. So, but thank you for putting that up for us to see how the illustrations work with the text. Uh, I'm very interested to know what feeds you, what keeps you going, what keeps you in touch, with your heart, because we have been speaking again about love and about the evolution of the artist. So,
Mhm.
what feeds you? And, a really simple question, and I only want 12 words on this. What brings you joy? And I am being sarcastic.
12 words on joy.
What brings you joy, first of all?
I like outfits.
You like
I
what?
like clothes
You like clothes.
and
I
outfits
love it.
and
I love it.
scarves and
Oh,
colors
scarves.
and jewelry. I do. I do. They make me happy.
Yes,
They
yes.
make me feel good. And I miss that because no one sees me anymore. So I'm like in pajamas all the time. And so, but I really, really, really love that. And then, and I am finding joy in drawing, and I'm finding reading always brings me joy.
Mhm.
Um,
What are you
and
reading? What are you reading now, Laraine?
um,
What?
I actually, this is somber, but I'm reading a book called The Art of Losing. Um, it brings me joy. It's
Okay. All right.
it's poems of grief and healing. So it's a bunch. It's poetry.
Mhm.
Um, I've been reading just tons of novels, and there's been time for that. That's been a
Yeah.
gift of the,
Okay. So that brings you joy. And clothes,
absolutely.
I mean, it's so interesting. That was
Clothes, it
not the
sounds so
answer I was
petty. I don't mean to
expecting for
be
some
petty.
reason. And I love it. I just
I,
love it.
I
Clothes
just,
and
I like
jewelry.
textures. I like, I like funky reading glasses.
So should we assume then, when we can go out more freely to a store, that you're going to go shopping immediately to the first clothes store?
Well, probably because I'm not sure what fits in. But
Okay.
I know what used to fit, and I've been afraid to try. But scarves
I love
always
it.
fit.
I
That's
love
why
it.
you can't go wrong with scarves. They always fit.
I love it. Do we have any questions? I mean, you can I think you can just raise your hand and just unmute yourself. I mean, you can put the question in the chat if you want, but if anyone has a question, do you want to raise your hand? And I'll just, Susan, just unmute
Yeah,
yourself.
I just wanted to, it's kind of more a comment, but I'm astonished. The illustrations, like that picture of the bird and the illustrations, I'm astonished that you didn't think of yourself as your artist and you didn't have training in art and you really, that's so beautiful,
Mhm.
remarkable.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I want to give a shout out to Alyssa Graybeal, who is on the call. We were at a writing retreat together, and she was drawing on her iPad next to me, and I'm like, that's cool. And then we've started becoming friends, and I feel like a lot of my courage to try to draw stemmed from watching her
Mhm.
draw, and then also that I taught those movement classes without being an athlete. So kind of having that experience in my body from earlier was like, all right, I'm going to put these illustrations out. I mean, um, I've always had a good sense of color and sense, those types of things. And before I was in academia, I worked in marketing, and I was an art director, but I hired artists. I didn't do the art. I hired artists. So I know what professional art looks like. And I kept like hearing like, it's not that. And my agent called, and she's like, so I'm looking at, it was actually the bird. And she's like, I don't even know what you're saying about it. This image makes me cry. And it made me think about what I'm tangling up in my head around what art is. And I feel like, I'm not an art snob, and I'm not a reading snob. And I think art makes you feel, and any art that makes you feel something is worth putting out there. But it was I was terrified to do it because I just
Oh,
was
I would
expecting
imagine. I mean,
I
you
was
must have
expecting
had
all the
doubt.
reviews to be like, I can't believe she's drawing, like I was just waiting for these horrible reviews about all the drawings. And
No, I love the drawings. I mean, I love the way the drawings connect with the text. They work so beautifully. We have another question. I think Joanne, you
Sure.
had your hand.
Yes, as Julie mentioned, I'm very interested in children's books. Although I don't teach children, I do read children's books to my college age students, and I'm wondering, yes, I have. I'm wondering, were there any children's books that you read as a child or you're reading now that inspire you?
Yes, two, which will for sure, which will come as no surprise if you look at the Grief Forest, was The Velveteen Rabbit.
Mm.
And then there was a book called The Country Bunny and the Little Gold Shoes.
Mm.
Um,
I know
and
that.
and in that book, that's, do I have it? I don't know if I have it in here. That book is about a girl bunny who wants to be the Easter bunny, but the grandfather bunnies tell her that being an Easter bunny is for boys. And but the book was written early, the 20s, 30s. The man who wrote the book wrote it for his daughter. So the father wrote it for his daughter so that she had a and I didn't know that when I read the book as a kid. I just thought it was a cool story about a bunny that got to be the Easter bunny. But then when I sought out that book about 20 years ago at a Barnes and Noble, I wanted to find that book again. And so
Here it
then I
is.
read.
It's right here. I think, excuse me, Kim,
Yeah.
do you have that book? See, Kim has it.
You have The Country Bunny and the Little Gold Shoes?
Yes, there it
Yep.
is.
It was one of my
There it is.
favorite books as well.
Fantastic. See, I always say the
so
right people
good.
show up for exactly the
Yeah,
right time.
it's so good. And
That's
yes. And her father, and then when I read it as an adult, I'm like, oh my God, her father wrote this for her. And then it just opened up this entire new understanding or new meaning for that book for me.
Is there anyone else that has a question? Would like to ask a question here? I have another one or two up my sleeve here. I love on your website, and first tell everyone how they can find out more about your books and how to order your books. Your website, Laraine, would you give that to all of us?
Sure, yeah, it's just LaraineHerring.com. And
Okay.
that's LARAINE, herring like the fish.com.
Okay, thank you. And on your website, you talk about your influencers, and one of them is Elvis Presley. One of your top 5, I think, your influencers. And then you have Robert Johnson and Toni Morrison and Faulkner. So can you, but I am very interested in how Elvis Presley influenced you.
I am a child of the South.
Ah,
And yeah, and so Elvis died he died the year after my father had his heart attack. My father loved Elvis, and we had Elvis albums all the time. You know, he especially liked the gospel albums. We had a lot of those gospel albums that would play in the house, and I remember when he died, a lot of people in my neighborhood caravan to Graceland for the funeral, and
wow.
but he was just so pivotal for me. And after my dad had his heart attack, he went out to speak. He had polio as a child, and he began leading groups for people with post polio, because that happened to, I think, just about everyone. And he would play Elvis. We would go with him, and he would play Elvis songs to these people in his groups. And so Elvis reminds me of my dad, and that's a part of it. But I have I know there are whatever issues with him for a lot of different ways, but I love that for a minute he had a voice that was incomparable, and he used it. And there's an early video you can find on YouTube that I use in my classes sometimes, before Elvis was Elvis, and he was just like working the fair circuit down in Mississippi and Alabama. And he starts to do the hip thing.
Yes.
And it was not on purpose. It was just like he was just moving. He was in harmony with his gift. And then the women went crazy, and you can see his eyes look around and go, that works. Let me try that again. And then, he tries it again. And of course it becomes this whole sort of thing, but I like watching people before they become who they become.
Mhm.
And that's harder to see in writing because, I mean, nobody's going to publish anybody's first drafts of things,
Yes.
but you
Yeah.
can see, my early work is different from my current work, but
Yeah.
you still don't see those moments where I'm scratching everything out and
Mhm.
trying things, because that just wouldn't be appropriate, but you can see it in the performing arts.
Yes.
And so I learn from that, and I love that.
Another person I'd love you to talk about as an early influencer, because it is Beverly Cleary. You mentioned Beverly Cleary, and I have 8 grandchildren, and one of my granddaughters, who is 7, and she lives in Indianapolis, and she is now reading Beverly Cleary. And when my daughter told me she was reading Beverly Cleary, all I could think about, I went back again to my neighborhood library, going around the corner and getting those 4 books and coming home in the rain and thinking it was the
Yeah.
best time of my life. So why Beverly Cleary?
Because she did what I wanted to do with Bunny. She treated children like people.
Mm.
In her books, children were people with agency.
Mm.
And their feelings were legitimized, and their experiences were legitimized, and she didn't minimize, she didn't talk down to them. Our first cat was named Beezus, after after Ramona's sister Beatrice was called Beezus. Anyway, Ramona just rocked, and she made pictures out of letters.
Mm. I like that.
She made
Ramona
the
just
Q. I
rocked.
think the Q was a quail. She was amazing.
Wonderful. Last question. 10 years from now, if I invited you back here, not on the screen, I hope, perhaps all together at a big, fabulous party.
That would be
we came
amazing.
together, and we all dress up.
Oh, yes, color, scarves.
Yes, with scarves and jewelry, yes. What would you like to be telling us in 10 years?
I would like to be here, first of all. And then I would like to still be talking about love. And I would like to think I've learned even more about how to love deeper. And I would like to think I've learned more about how to forgive deeper, because I feel like that's a piece I'm working on still.
Well, I have to thank you. I mean, I think on that note, there's no more beautiful note from anyone's voice that we could possibly end this event tonight, other than using the word love, particularly at this time when we are, I think, so skin hungry. And that's a new term that I just read about today, that we are so skin hungry. So I thank you from my heart for speaking to us so openly and so honestly, and for teaching us, and for bringing us together, for connecting with us, because that is a gift that we cannot put any price on. It is the connection, and you have given us the connection to yourself, and to listen to your voice has just been so joyous for me, and I think I can speak for everyone. So,
well, thank you. It was really, really, really my pleasure. I got to put on an outfit.
fabulous, fabulous.
It was so wonderful. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Don't forget to buy The Grief Forest by Laraine Herring.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone. Bless you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Hi, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
Yes, Julie.
My
was
pleasure.
wonderful.
My pleasure, everyone. Good night, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Laraine.
Thank you.
Laraine.
Thank you.